I'm Congressman Jack Kingston. I represent the 1st District of Georgia. Thank you all for being here today. This is an issue that we want to talk about because it goes to a number of things. It goes to the Constitution, Section 2, Article 2. It goes to transparency in government. It goes to openness and responsibility. We believe the President has the right to pick his own team, but we believe also in the Constitution and the Senate's right to vet principal officers of an administration. And we've seen with the Van Jones debacle what happens when you don't go through that process. Ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Lamar Smith, cannot be with us today because they're in a markup, but he has circulated a letter, which I think you have, that he sent to Chairman Conyers asking for hearings. There are other members who will be speaking on that, but first let me yield the floor to Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who has a new resolution that she wants to speak about.
Thank you, Jack. And as you can see, we have a team effort to get a handle on this issue of the czars. The American people certainly realize that this is one of those issues that seems to have grown and have expanded. And I think they also realize that not all czars are created equal. So what we have is a way to address this situation. I have a piece of legislation that we are introducing today, and it has over 100 original co-sponsors on this bill. The bill will call for immediate transparency. It will request that the White House report to us on the czars, their positions, who has been vetted, who is not. Then it also calls for Congress to hold hearings on this process that has been carried forth. Now, here's a great example for you. This is the application that anyone that is going through Senate confirmation has to fill out for the Senate Armed Services Committee. It is intrusive, it is lengthy, it details a lot of information about who you are, where you've been, what your conflicts of interest would be. It is what is required of someone that is going to go through the vetting process to handle the public trust. We think that all czars should be required to display that type transparency. As I said, my resolution, which is a sense of Congress resolution, calls for immediate action, for a report and for hearings. You're going to hear more about Congressman Kingston's resolution, which is the long-term accountability component of that process. And we have another another bill, which Congressman Scalise is going to speak to you about, which would be the sunsetting for all the czar positions.
Well, thank you, Marsha, and thank you, Jack, for your leadership on this issue. I think all of us, you can tell, have had really serious concerns about this increasing trend of more czars being appointed, people that don't have the accountability and the transparency that, in fact, President Obama promised when he was running as a candidate to provide. So what we're trying to do is shine the light on the fact that you've got this large number of people who are heading up agencies, who are assuming titles and positions that in essence have some excuse me, some of the powers of a cabinet secretary. The difference is none of these people went through the formal vetting process that's involved in Senate confirmation, which is a clear violation of the U.S. Constitution. And we think this issue needs to be addressed. What I've filed is H.R. 3569, which is called the SAC Act. This bill would sunset all czars effective December 31st of this year. Now, it still provides the process if somebody actually went through that vetting process, was confirmed by the Senate, then they would be able to retain their position. But for those people who circumvented the transparent process that's involved in Senate confirmation, they would be sunsetted. And I think the American people have asked for and deserve that kind of accountability from government. People are very concerned as they see this alarming trend in an increased number of people, over 30 by most accounts, appointed by this president in positions of extreme power, who have broad, wide-ranging powers without the accountability that comes with a Senate confirmation process. And so this legislation has nearly 20 co-sponsors. I know the other legislation is continuing to gain steam, too, as we try to rein in these czars and hold these people accountable who have powerful positions in government that should be accountable to the people. With that, I yield. back to Mr. McHenry.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Jack, for your leadership. I'm Congressman Patrick McHenry from North Carolina's 10th Congressional District. As a member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, I've asked the chairman, Towns, to require all the czars within the Obama administration to testify. Now, there's a certain amount of controversy about how many czars there actually are. There have been accounts of 30 and 40 and various numbers around there of the administration. The administration has not released these numbers. The concern that we have here on the Hill, and my colleagues here today, our concern is that the constitutional process has been circumvented by allowing the appointment of high administration officials who make policy to be appointed, in essence, without Senate confirmation. That's counter to the Constitution. One of two things is happening here. Either these czars have serious policy-making expertise and power, which would be counter to the Constitution, or they're simply figureheads, at which point they're collecting a salary for doing no work for the taxpayers. I think we need to have an open and transparent and constitutional process to appoint high administration officials. Furthermore, if you look at an example of Carol Browner, for instance, she is in essence acting as a super cabinet secretary because she is in charge of both the Energy Department and the EPA. So if you can see an example like that within the administration where a czar is in essence acting as a super cabinet secretary, it makes it very clear that they must go through the constitutional process of being confirmed by the Senate. Furthermore, it's not simply about Senate confirmation. It's about being accountable to the people. Van Jones was a perfect example of somebody who had not been vetted properly, and therefore a simple Google search, the administration would be able to find his extremist past. And it seems that they didn't even do that. That is sad, it's disappointing, and it raises questions about all the other czars within this administration. So that's why we're here today, to make the administration accountable, open, and transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, and I thank my colleagues for bringing these important issues forward. Many of us just returned from our congressional districts where we had town hall meetings, and a lot of people focused on the issue that was being brought up was the health insurance plan. But I would tell you in many of my town halls, and I suspect my colleagues as well, is the issue of these czars came up. And why did it come up? Because these are unprecedented times in our country. The American people are seeing massive government intrusion in almost every area of their lives. They're seeing government take over banks, taking over auto companies. Now the government wants to take over their health insurance. And they see these czar positions being handed out like candy suckers, and they wonder what kind of accountability and transparency comes with these czars that this president ran on his campaign, saying we're going to be a very open, transparent administration. Yet these people show up, and we know very little about them. We know that they're getting pretty nice salaries, but we don't have any information about them, and they're not accountable to anybody. And so I applaud my colleagues. These efforts that are being brought forward today are not a cry from members of Congress. Folks, be really clear about what this is. This is a cry from the American people. They're kind of fed up with what they see going on, and they see this as another area of where more big government, less accountability, and they're concerned about it. And I applaud my colleagues for their efforts in this area.
I'm Paul Brown. I represent Georgia's 10th Congressional District. Constitution, Article 1, Section 1 says all legislative authority lies within the Congress of the United States. We have czars that establish policy. They're not just advising the president, they're establishing policy and law. When we have justices and czars and executive orders that establish law outside of the Congress of the United States, these things are unconstitutional. They need to be reined in. And what we're doing is presenting bills that will hopefully open up this process, will shine the light of day and get some transparency. Congressman Nagelbauer is exactly right. During my town hall meetings, I heard over and over again about the American public's fear of these czars. They are taking away freedom. They're doing things that are unconstitutional. We need to stop this process. We need to have an openness. We need to call the president to task, and we need to call these czars to task to make sure that at least we have some vetting in this process of establishing czars. And personally, I believe we need to stop the czar process. Republican and Democratic presidents alike have established czars. It's been unprecedented, the number that's been established in this administration. I believe it needs to stop. And I think the American people deserve it to stop. And I'm here to support my colleagues in their efforts to bring about transparency and to stop this process.
I'm Mike Pence, the House Conference Chairman, and I'm here to commend my colleagues for their energetic leadership on behalf of the American people. Especially want to commend Congressman McHenry, Congresswoman Blackburn, and Congressman Smith of the Judiciary Committee. You know, the Constitution of the United States doesn't get read often enough in this building. Nowhere in this document can I find the word czar. But what I do find is a very clear obligation under Article 1 for the Congress to provide advice and consent in the formation of a government in the executive branch. Thanks to the leadership of the members who are gathered here, Congress, if just from the Republican minority, is asserting its constitutional prerogative to insist on advice and consent in the formation and the approval of high-ranking officials in this government. I was pleased to see the President's green job czar resign. But let's be clear. This czar issue is not about the extremist views of one man. It is about the proper role of the Congress of the United States in providing the accountability of the American people. The President of the United States should cease and desist with the appointment of any additional czars until Congress can carefully examine the constitutionality of this practice and can carefully examine the background and credentials of those who have been appointed without congressional consent.
Mike said it all. I'll pile on only with a little bit of legacy. I'm Congressman Darrell Issa, and Lamar Smith and I sent the letter to the President trying to get the President to quantify what he's doing and how much he's paying and where he's placing these people. Whether it's the 32 czars you've heard, the 54 number that is often identified by various positions, it's very clear we've gone a long way from the 13 that his predecessor had, one of whom, of course, was the drug czar that has been so well known for so many years. I said legacy. I'm old enough to remember the pummeling that Ronald Reagan took for having a kitchen cabinet. A group of people that he had known and that he had been his friends throughout life and who had helped him when he was governor of California, but who were not in the government. He understood that they didn't get paid, they didn't move with the color of the office around and make speeches or do anything. They advised him personally. We accept that today as the right of the President to seek counsel from anyone. But this formation of a shadow cabinet that in fact is more than twice the size of the real cabinet is a danger to the very question of who is advising the President and on what basis, whether or not they go out saying that they represent the President without so much as us even knowing if they should have been, if they passed an FBI investigation and whether or not they were an appropriate individual. So that's really what we're here about, is the President can seek advice from anyone. He can have as many people on the staff of the executive office of the President. But Lamar Smith and I, both for constitutional and oversight reasons, want him to quantify who they are, where they are, which ones are confirmed, and ultimately we expect him to have to do some soul searching, which is, even if it's only 32, it'd be 32 people who theoretically represent the President and have direct access to the President over and above a cabinet. The term shadow cabinet has two reasons for my using it here today. One is it's a cabinet without the legitimacy of the office and the confirmation. And two, they operate without the oversight and visibility that is essential that every cabinet officer has. And I think the important thing is that they not undermine the legitimate confirmation process of those cabinet positions that are here, or even if the President wanted another cabinet position, he should ask for it and not simply appoint people who can operate in the background without oversight or confirmation. Thank you.
Can I borrow this for a second?
I'm John Shattuck of Arizona. I want to bring just a slightly different perspective. I want to thank the members of this, organizers of this press conference, Mr. Issa, Jack Kingston, Ms. Bachman, and others, and Ms. Blackburn, not Ms. Bachman, for bringing this issue up. And we're all concerned, and we're all proposing a remedy. The remedy is that, as our conference leader just said, not appoint anymore, and have these people go through some sort of an appointment process. I want to make the point that there's a different remedy. Having the government vet all these people through a confirmation process will take forever. You are the other remedy. Self-government without trust won't work. What's happening here is the American people don't know who these people are. I'd like to ask you, who are these people? What responsibilities do they have? And what authority do they have? And what's their background? Where did they come from? And how did they get this responsibility? How much are their budgets? That's the job of the media. You, with all due respect, can make the need for this legislation irrelevant if you'll dig in and tell us who these people are. But I don't think the people know who they are, and that's why they're calling our offices and saying, what's the deal with all these czars and what is their control over our lives? And we can do it by a confirmation process, but I'm suggesting the news media in America has an opportunity to look at these people and tell the American people who they are, and maybe they're fine. But until that information comes out, the American people are not going to be comfortable with all of these people whom they don't know in powers of trust and in positions of responsibility without having gone through any process, certainly not the process the Founding Fathers called for, but also not having gone the kind of vetting they ought to go through in the news media in America.
I know that guy.
I'm Cliff Stearns from the 6th District of Florida. I wrote a letter to the President on the 2nd of September on this issue. I think my colleague has done an excellent job of illustrating what the problem is. I'm on Jack Kingston's bill. He was one of the leaders here. Let me just point out that obviously every president has had czars, and this can be a question of how many. The Bush administration, the Clinton administration, even going back to the Nixon administration. But the real question is accountability and transparency. There's no accountability, there's no transparency, and more importantly, there's no one that's supervising these people. Now, the Constitution says basically if you have a czar, you've got to have somebody that the czar reports to. It's not clear who the individual czars are reporting to. Until we find this information out, I call upon the President to answer the letters myself and other members have had, and actually I think I call upon the Speaker to have a hearing on this if she really believes that she wants transparency and accountability.
I'm Ted Poe from Texas. All presidents have had advisors. That is good. They can have as many advisors as they wish from wherever they wish to get that advice. But when an advisor crosses the line from being an advisor to a policymaker and a decision maker for the government, that person then needs to be held accountable to the people of the United States. And that is why we are concerned. Are these czars advisors or are they policymakers? If they become policymakers, then transparency is important, accountability is important, and confirmation by the United States is mandatory.
Hi, Bob Latta from Ohio 5, and I'm not going to pile on what's been said, but I'm going to just put a face on this real quick. I was across my entire district, 16 counties in northwest, north central Ohio during the break. I represent the largest manufacturing district in Ohio, 15th largest in the country, and I also represent the largest ag district. When I go in all my factories and I'm talking to my people out there, they are scared to death because they want to know exactly who's making policy in this country, because when their jobs are on the line, that's what it's coming down to now. These people's jobs are on the line, and they're saying, wait a minute, who's running the car companies? I'm a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 worker out there. I don't work for the big ones. And they're saying they're going to get bailed out. What about us? But these people out there in my district, and I tell you, I've got counties that never had unemployment over 4 or 5%. They're now running 15 to 16%. And these folks in America are saying, we want accountability, we want transparency, but by George, we want to know who's running this place, because it's our jobs, it's our future, our kids, and we want to know who it is. Thank you.
We have some other members who haven't spoken yet, but I know some of you are on a tight schedule. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. But we got 3 folks here who haven't spoken. Frank, Did you talk about the FBI?
No, I haven't.
And I want Frank Wolf to tell you about a letter he wrote the president on the czar question.
Yeah. I'm Congressman Wolf. I, ranking member on the committee appropriations with jurisdiction over the FBI. We called the FBI about this. Do they do a background check? The FBI said they do a background check, but it's the same background check they would do for an intern at the White House. But they do not do a security clearance. They give all the information over to the White House. They don't know what the criteria is, whether they determine who gets a security check. So a very minor background check was done, a security check was not done, the decision making. So the White House probably knew what these people were involved in, but the FBI doesn't get involved once they give the information to the White House. Thank you, Jack. And they ought to. We ought to have a criteria and standards so we know what they've looked at, what they've done, so we're able to say if they put somebody on, we know they've made a mistake. Thanks, Frank.
I'm not going to repeat what my friends here have been talking about with regard to the czars, but what this complete unaccountability has created is an atmosphere of arrogance that we don't need to have people vetted. And it is dangerous for this country. And some of you who have been around more than a year or two recall that President Bush got beat up for the Deepwater oil leases that were signed in 1998 and 1999, where we basically gave away $10 billion, either through gross negligence or we don't know if there was any intent, because the Inspector General who testified before our committee said, well, those two people had left the government, so unless there's probable cause that they committed a crime or something, they just can't question them. And lo and behold, that atmosphere of arrogance, bring in czars, bring in this, that, no accountability. We have just hired, apparently, the two people responsible for those leases where we gave away $10 billion in 98 and 99. And now there'll be Deputy Assistant Secretary of Land and Minerals Management and Deputy Director of Mineral Management Service. And by the way, that Inspector General that just said he couldn't really pursue how we lost that $10 billion, how that came about, that was Earl Devaney. You may recognize the name. He's the man who's chairman of supervising and making sure that the $787 billion is properly spent. There's a reason to be concerned about this lack of accountability.
Good afternoon. I'm Congressman G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania 5th District, and I'm proud to be here actually as a member of the freshman Republican team. And my colleagues and I, we came to Washington knowing we could do better and knowing that we needed more transparency and more accountability from the federal government. And since we've arrived here, we've gone the complete opposite direction, and one of the leading factors in that is this creation of what I would call a stealth branch of government. We came here knowing what our roles and responsibilities were as a part of the legislative body, and looking forward to exercising our responsibilities within the jurisdictions of the committees that we have the privilege to sit on. But now we have these czars, this stealth branch of government, that's circumventing complete and working without transparency and working without accountability. And I'm so thankful to my colleagues who have taken the leadership with the pieces of legislation that they've proposed, and looking forward that together we can correct this situation. Thank you.
Dan, you can say what we all said again.
I'll make it very short. This year's season of Dancing with the Czars should be canceled. And I say that because when I went home and talked to people in my district, I did not bring up the czars. We talked about health care, we talked about spending, we talked about taxation, we talked about debt, we talked about the government getting too large. But time and time again, average everyday citizens in my district asked me about czars. When I explained that we had similar type positions in the past, that didn't satisfy them because they see too many. They see somehow government getting away from regular control. And at a time when the question of the trustworthiness of government is at hand, and although the president may not have remembered August, I remember it very well. And although we've heard from some of the leadership in the Democratic Party in the House that suggested people were un-American by attending those, I found them to be very American. I found no mobs. I found nobody that was out there hateful. I found people concerned about their country.
and they brought up the subject. I never brought it up once. They want to know what's happening to their government. We need to reinstill trust in our government. We need to show them that we stand up for those things we've said we would stand up for when we ran for office and what the president talked about. And that is transparency in government. One of the watchwords of the aftermath of what happened on Wall Street was the lack of transparency. Wouldn't it be a bitter irony that as we in the Congress who've condemned those on Wall Street for what happened there because of an abject lack of transparency, then came to Washington and allowed that same sort of lack of transparency to reign here? We need to have a call for questions of constitutionality, but also of just simple good government and trust.
And we'll be glad to answer any questions. We've been joined also by Bob Inglis of South Carolina, so if anybody has any questions. Yes, sir.
Mr. Shadegg is gone now, but I do want to dig into one particular czar. You have him up there, the science czar, Dr. Holdren. He wrote in one of his books, Human Ecology, that a baby, if it's given in its crucial early years, the proper food and social development, that it might turn into a human being. And this in addition to views about development in the United States. Do you think he should come back to Congress and clarify his views? And I'd welcome it.
Absolutely. I think that's why you want to have a vetting process, because another thing he said in his book, I think, and this was an old statement, but he did say that 1 billion people would die of global warming by the year 2020. Well, if that's the case, we need to know about it. And coming from the science czar, that makes you think, okay, maybe the guy knows something we better find out about. But that's all part of the process. I believe he also said people should be able, or animals should be able to sue people, or trees, or something equally responsible. My concern is this. One example, and I don't know if he falls exempt from the Freedom of Information Act or not, but the healthcare czar actually is exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. So we won't know until 5 years after this administration leaves office what impact the healthcare czar had on the biggest debate we're having in the nation right now. And that should be disturbing to anybody.
Although most of us, I think here, believe that that human being came about at conception, I would have to say that I actually have some empathy for his comment, because I do believe that if you were to feed and nurture and love, that actually some members of Congress could turn into human beings.
That's why you believe in redemption. Other questions?
And on that note,
you talked about the constitutionality of czars being one of the big factors, but if they are unconstitutional now, why wasn't this brought up during the last administration?
Lamar's not here, but I'll endeavor to give you the most succinct answer. There's a way to have every czar constitutional. One, have them be a assistant secretary of something that is appropriate to the job they're doing and thus confirmed. You can still call them a czar, but then they fit into an authorized slot with certain supervision defined, a secretary, cabinet officer they report to. There's no problem with that. The drug czar, in fact, comes before Congress regularly. There are ways to make some of these positions completely acceptable constitutionally and to both parties. So that's why having some czars can be justified, even if not popular back home. But we owe it to the American people to make sure that each position is properly vetted. If they're going to have authority over anybody under the rules and the way the statute has been produced, they have to go through confirmation by the Senate. And it's kind of interesting, it's House Republicans demanding that Senate Democrats have some oversight. But that's really what we're doing for those positions. The other way to make it constitutional is they can have no supervision. They can all be in the executive office of the president and come under that set of rules and oversight and report to the president. The problem is, right now, they fit in all different channels. They're being put in different places. That's why I call them a shadow cabinet, is some of these people can walk directly into the Oval Office. Some of them have never been in it, and that's not justifiable as this has grown.
Now, let me add one thing to what he is saying to give you a little bit of background on that and how this is being handled. In the 8 months that have transpired in this administration. There are 10 Senate-confirmed czars that are in place. There are 14 that have been appointed. 3 have been created by executive order. 7 have been appointed by an agency secretary. 1 is appointed by the Senate Majority Leader, and 1 is a career appointee. So those are, as Mr. Issa was saying, the different categories that these are coming under now. Contrasting that with the previous administration, just so that you can see, in the 8 years there, President Bush had 12 Senate-confirmed czars. 15 were appointed, and 3 were created by executive order.
I have a question. This
Yeah.
pertains to you, Ms. Blackburn, also, Mr. Kingston left, and Mr. Scalise is here. There. It's hard to keep track who's coming and going here.
Yeah.
It's hard to lose.
The three of you guys have numbers on your back. Since you guys have these resolutions, how do you anticipate these resolutions coming to the floor, other than making them privileged? Does the Democratic leader, do you think they're going to go for any of these resolutions to bring these up? And granted, they're non-binding.
We don't expect them to come up. We expect this administration here in the House to do what they've been doing, which is promise transparency, promise this level of oversight and legitimacy, and then not deliver it. Part of the reason that we hope for better, but feel the latter, is that we now have a track history of not 8 months, but 2 years and 8 months of Speaker Pelosi saying things like how legitimate everything's going to be. Well, in fact, very clearly, if you're not indicted, convicted, and removed by the voters of your district, you will not lose an executive position under her watch.
Now, and to add, Chad, onto where we are with this situation, I think what you can see, as you see from what transpired in D.C. last week, with somewhere between 400,000 and upwards of 1 million people being here for the Tea Party, the American people are paying very close attention to what is taking place, and it will be through the good work of the citizens that deeply love this country and are very concerned about what is taking place that issues and bills and resolutions such as we are presenting will be brought forward. They're speaking out, and I expect that will continue.
And Chad, let me say this. When I first introduced this legislation in the form of an amendment to the Financial Services Appropriation Bill on July 9th, it lost by a vote of 36 to 22. Solid party line vote. I can promise you, if those particularly swing state Democrats heard what we heard over the month of August, there's no way in the world they would have stuck with the no vote. Mr. Lundgren and others have said none of us were anticipating this catching on fire the way it has, but because we've been working on this issue for a couple of months now. But August, suddenly everybody decided this is a very high concern. So I will introduce it next year on appropriation bills as well. So sooner or later, we will continue to push this and have the venue for a vote.
If I can add to that, Chad, I hope that I'm able to get a vote on the SAC Act. I would like to see this passed into law. Realistically, we know the dynamics of the House, and we know that Speaker Pelosi is paying lip service to transparency. She has made a lot of comments before the Democrats took the majority and since she became Speaker that this was going to be the most transparent administration in history, and yet what we've seen probably is the least transparent administration in history. Where I think we have the ability to make real progress is the fact that now the American people are holding members of Congress accountable too. And I think the most obvious example of just how I think we can shape this debate and why I don't think any of us are wasting our time here is if you look at what happened with Acorn just this week. For years, many of us have been trying to rein in the abuses of Acorn getting taxpayer money, and this is literally a criminal organization, getting taxpayer money with no accountability, and members of this administration, both in Congress and in the White House, defending them at every turn and throwing back every effort we've pushed to try to rein in Acorn. And yet now, because of some of the recent videos that have come out showing the criminal activity, where everybody can see it, there was a vote in the Senate earlier this week, overwhelmingly that passed, denying taxpayer funds to Acorn. And this is the same administration that just weeks ago wouldn't even allow any of our legislation to rein in Acorn for a vote on the House floor. So while I do think they're going to continue to try to cover up a lot of the abuses that are going on, I think the fact that the American people are paying such keen attention to these issues gives us the opportunity to finally hold them accountable.
I'd like to say something. Paul Brown from Georgia 10. The Constitution of the United States starts with three very powerful words: we the people. We the people of what slowed down this process on Obamacare, and hopefully will stop it. Stop this administration and Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid from destroying the health care system in this country. I heard over and over again in my town hall meetings the people demanding to know something about these Czars. And when we start hearing the great outcry from the people all over this country, particularly in the Democrats, senator states and in the Democratic members' congressional districts, demanding some answers about the Czars, hopefully our bills will see the light of day and will at least be heard on the floor of the U.S. House and U.S. Senate so that we can get some answers for the people. The American people needed and are demanding answers about the Czars, as well as all these other issues that we face. So I'm very hopeful that these bills will see the light of day and hopefully will be passed into law.
Thank you very much for coming here.